This is Talking in Stations, Season 3, Episode number 22. It is September 18th. I always am Artimus Albosa, member of NOIR. Joining me today, my co-host, RonUSMC, a member of Test Alliance Please Ignore.
Hey guys.
Also joining us as always, our co-host, Silver Suspiria, a member of Federation Uprising. Silver? Hey, there we go. And we have a fantastic set of guests with us today. So let's roll down the list in alphabetical order. We have a member of Pandemic Horde, and in fact, an alliance director for Pandemic Horde, Adra, whose name is too long for me to pronounce.
How's it going, team? Adramelech, Indra. You can just call me Adra. It's a lot easier.
Excellent. Adra it is. Also, we have a director for her corporation, Sundering, Don Rhea, member of Goonswarm Federation.
Hello, I'm Dawn, and I am happy to be here.
And we are happy to have you. Another member of Pandemic Horde, and indeed another alliance director for Pandemic Horde, we have Johnny Trousersnake.
Hey, hello.
And last but certainly not least, we have a strategic fleet commander from Test Alliance Please Ignore, John Hun.
Hey.
Welcome, welcome all. We have a very large guest and a very large topic to discuss, so let's jump right into it. Tonight we are talking about Cyno Changes and capital fleet fights. And I think the way we're going to go about this is, first of all, we're going to give a recap of the changes that have occurred to Cynos Earl Fields, the module thingies that occurred on the last patch, and then we'll jump into discussing how things have changed for defensive operations, protecting crabs under super capital umbrellas, as they're commonly known, and then we'll work our way into sort of capital escalation and normal subcap v subcap fights and things of that nature. So let's jump right into it and say, if you've been living under a rock, or maybe just forgot because stuff happens, the changes that occurred to Cynos are as such. You previously could fit a Cyno to any ship whatsoever, and assuming your system wasn't Cyno jammed, light it if you had liquid ozone. Now that has changed, you can only fit Cynos to combat recon ships, force recon ships, which are the cloaky ones. So this is like the Pilgrim, the Falcon, the Rapier, and the what's the fourth one? Arazu. Thank you. So those are the four cloaky recons. They're T2 ships. You can also fit them to the Black Ops battleships. And those are the only ships in the game, those 9, including the Marshal, are the only ships in the game that can fit a signed user role field module. So those are the only ships in the game that capitals and super capitals can jump to. There was a new module added called the Freight Cyno, which can be fit to Tech 1 and Tech 2 industrial ships, which can now service jump freighters and things of that nature. And those are the changes. People expected these to be massive changes with widespread effects, and a lot of people were salty, a lot of people were happy. Let's jump into discussing immediately, what has happened since patch day? What has happened since these things got started? And let's begin with fights that have gone down over what everybody was hoping this change would affect, super capital umbrellas. So first, looking down my list of many battle reports, we have a battle report from Legacy dropping on Fraternity. And I guess John, Ron, Silver, you guys are fighting down in that area. It seems like these sorts of fights happen often. Walk me through, we're looking at a battle report, or at least we will be shortly. It occurred in HTAC 9 on the 14th at around 1600. Do you guys describe either this fight or any other one that you have been a part of?
Well, John knows these changes backwards and forwards, but I would say that the first thing, is who has the recon, right? And where's the backup recon, and who's got the third recon, and who has recons in their ship maintenance array. It's so about getting the recons on grid as soon as possible, and then that's the only way you can get them there, right? And they can be waterboarded, etc. But um, and John can has a lot of time in the defense fleet, and you know just it's pretty massive, man. It's pretty massive.
So I get the impression this has more to do with who has recons and the mechanics at play than it is with who is flying what ships, right? What side of the map we're on doesn't matter as much as the mechanics themselves. Let's not focus on the fights. Let's focus on the mechanics and how people are responding to them and just open it up to the floor. Guys, how are you seeing these changes impact your gameplay?
Well, for test at least, it hasn't really changed the way we do things a lot. You know, we haven't been in a big capital fight since the changes, and that'll be the real test of how hard is it to maintain a capital fight like that when you're, you know, standard procedure before was you jump a super carrier, titan, fax, and you'd light a cyno on that, and you'd have 20 million HP to either live through or rep up, and your cyno would pretty much never die for as long as you're ozone. Now you have like 100,000 DHP cruiser, which if anyone has been in a fight recently with Munins, their go-to choice for most nullsec battles, they just instantly die. There's no saving them. There's no repping them against that. Against like 30 Munins, they're just dead. But if you're careful with where you put your recons, you can make them live. And so far for us, it's been okay. We've had no hiccups where we haven't been able to get support for supers or capitals. The H63 fight was an interesting one. Not many cynos were lit in it. We used a cyno to bridge in out of system, and then a cyno to drop the dreads that you'll see. Fraternity never counter-dropped us, never counter-dropped the dreads. They only brought their Munin fleet, and by the time the Munins arrived, the recon with its 5-minute cyno was gone. So we never had to deal with that. And our cyno with for bridging in, it was in a different system, and so it never got touched and also survived. But in other fights we've had, they have just died like instantly, so you get like 30 seconds to jump if even.
Awesome. How about other members of our panel here? Have you guys done saves on your particular setting? Go ahead, Adra.
This hasn't been as much saves, but we recently had a fight in FDZ with goons, and there are a couple other SIGs that have deployed up to Geminate, to NPC Geminate in FDZ. So we actually burned through 6 recons. So the big thing is that when you light, obviously you can't move anymore. And when you have dreads on grid, the dreads are just basically perfectly tracking as long as the dreads aren't moving either. So we would have, most of our cynos, they'd light, and then, 10, 15 seconds later, they just get absolutely obliterated by 1 to 2 dread shots. And, we're trying to filter in more. It definitely changes escalation a little bit. One, you have to be able to plan a lot better, at least defensively, for escalations and capital fights, because you have to have just the sheer number of recons available in order to start moving in, and be able to counter escalate like what's basically by the book, which is you drop as many as you need, and then wait for them to counter drop, then you counter drop on top of them, etc. and so forth, because your cynos are just getting instantly evaporated. And also leads to a couple of other different points, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit later on. But at least in terms of the escalation and cap play, I think it's leading to a bit more of defensive play, mainly because, one, it's easier to reship your recon cynos, but it also makes it a little more difficult to make offensive plays because of that. So.
Curious. Dawn, how about you? You're doing a lot of the defensive operations, but I've also got an offensive one, or a battle report from an offensive one you were involved with. What's been your experience?
So, the changes to the cynos have definitely required us to tighten up. We used to kind of be more relaxed because we have a pretty big group and trained group to take care of these kinds of things. When things start happening, that you can always rely on somebody to bring a cyno, somebody to do this, somebody to do that. So most of the line members never had to be self-responsible, even though they really should have been. So now we're requiring people to have cynos available if they're going to be in space, because it's already a lot of work just to get us prepared to help them out, that asking them to have a cyno is like the little bit we can ask them to meet us halfway with our saves that we try to do, because it's never just 10 bombers. It's never 2-3 dreads. We get 10 dreads, we get 200 bombers. It's always something big. So we need as much help as we can get. The battle report is actually from a fun thing we did on Sunday. We took a capital realm out and about. The Cyno Changes were interesting. It was actually during the final days of blackout, so no one believed that there were 80 capitals just flying through space with no rhyme or reason. And courtesy to Jay, he let me take it out. So I was actually leading it. And we had about 4 or 5 recon, just kind of pre-staging in places trying to find things. The only people that wanted to play with us was Test. So that's why we ended up fighting a Test. We did headshot Billy the second he got on. He was in a recon, so he brought the pain. And I think we took down a Rorqual too. But we weren't dropping to like hurt anybody. We were looking for a brawl. And Brave would not undock for us.
Well, when you take 80 capitals into someone's space, it requires quite a big farm up from most alliances to counter 80 capitals, right? So it's one of the problems with capital roams is it's hard to get content with them. And yeah, I was there and I was in a recon and you headshot me straight away as soon as I let the Cyno, but we got our supers in and you all died, so...
Well, we figured that would happen once we jumped into Esoteria. We had like 15 minutes of red timer. We're like, we're here. This is what's happening now.
I mean, speaking of that fight, it sort of shows the changes and the implications in them quite well. Because even though we knew goons were not out to, kill 6 titans or whatever, they were just out for some fun, celebrating the end of blackout and stuff. We still had to consider that DTX is in range of Summer Stain, and that we needed extra recon. So part of the slower response to 80 capitals in test space is because we have to double check now that we have enough Cynos. It's no more just every Titan is a Cyno anymore. It's, do we have at least five recons, and then can they reship? Do Titans have them in their ship maintenance bays and stuff, which just really does add to response time. And like 3 minutes can make a huge deal in trying to catch a Titan or whatever if they are trying to get away.
Speaking of response time, we had an unfortunate incident this week, and the fact that we didn't have quick Cynos like we did before potentially is a reason why we lost a Leviathan this. Now, happy to report that pilot was able to buy a Titan in 2 and then fit it with officer smart bombs in about 2 days. But we had a big drop in our home system 1DQ, and it was just everything worked out the way it did, and the Titans got warped off the Keepstar as they undocked, so they had no time to cancel. They ended up in like some bubble traps with like 40 dreads, and trying to get Cynos in place to jump out of system to jump back into system wasted probably a minute or 2, and he was struggling to keep his hardeners on. So the fact that we couldn't just get a Cynosceptor over there through all the bubbles and get everybody in place in under 2 minutes probably cost that we lost that Titan.
Wow.
Yeah, I think the ability to waterboard Cynos is a huge change, right? I mean, to me, I think that's probably the biggest factor to a slower response than you would have gotten normally.
That also semi depends on how you want to, like, how much you want to invest in this, because you can still, I believe you can still use covert Cynos with T3Cs, cloaking Nully T3Cs, then bridging your Falcon with a Blops or something like that. Again, that's one reason I think that it's going to start leading to, if it hasn't already, some more defensive gameplay. Is you can move a covert Cyno out a few jumps from, or bridge it out to a few jumps from your staging to a beacon or whatnot, and then bridge your Falcon in right at 0 or wherever you need it to be.
Makes beacons so strong, I think.
Yeah.
Why is that, Trousersnake? Why do you think beacons are really strong?
Because it gives you rapid mobility, gives you the ability to project your Cynos out much more quickly than you could previously. Like the go-to fast response Cyno before the changes was usually an interceptor, because you can warp at 80 U a second and align in 2 seconds and be on grid very, very quickly to put in something heavier to light a hard cyno for the fleet to come in on. Whereas the beacon gives you that flexibility that actually happen to physically be there.
Oh yeah, you can Titan bridge recons onto a beacon, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can
And, like,
even do the Blops bridge to regular cynos too.
Yeah, and I like the Blops bridge idea, but now you're talking about pretty advanced tactics, and not every group that slows down things too. If your Cyno's getting waterboarded and you're like, oh well, let's get a nullified, Tengu out there and we'll Blops bridge a recon out there. Now you got to get your Blops bridge ready. There's a lot more people and alts and characters that need to be around at the ready, like way more. Like you used to be able to just get a low SP alt and a travel scepter and shoot them out there. Now, like your rapid response is more advanced and requires more SP and more accounts available.
Sounds to me like something that a mega coalition with an umbrella that's running 24/7 should probably be fine doing. But a small, independent, null security alliance definitely isn't going to be able to do. Is that a hot take, or is that pretty self-explanatory?
Actually, it's really dependent upon people's motivation. First day Cynos came out, one pilot had 8 recons ready, and other people had them around their own ship. But just having them, as he said, ready to go, there was maybe 2 or 3 from other people. So you think in an alliance our size, we should have more people, and that's something that we keep trying to motivate. But a lot of people don't understand how hard it is to get these people motivated to protect themselves. So when they spout on Reddit about, oh, well, you have 2,000 people, it should be no problem, it can't be a problem.
I mean, speaking of motivation, you AWOXed a bunch of your own Rorquals on, I think it was patch day or the day after, because they didn't have proper fits and everything updated.
Well, he got tackled in the morning. We told him he needed to fix his stuff. So we gave him a warning. Actually, he'd been warned multiple times. And then he decided to get tackled again. So they decided to scare the baddies off and then killed him instead. So that's why we got the kills.
Oh boy. Tough love over there, tough love.
Yeah, and to back it up a little bit too, I do think that it is more cost prohibitive for smaller groups. I mean, on the whole, it's just going to be, if you have 10% of your pilots or even 5% of your pilots that can fly, that have recon ults, obviously you're going to have a larger number, just obviously because that's how numbers work. When you have 30,000 people, 15,000 people versus having 100 or 200 in your corporation or your alliance. But it makes it also really cost prohibitive. Both in multiple ways, not just having the Cyno itself or the SP itself, but it makes it a lot harder to do logistics. It makes it a lot harder for newer players to get into capitals, which some could say it's both good and bad. But it also means that smaller groups, if they want to engage capitals, it's going to be more ISK for them to engage. And I think just overall, it's just not super I understand. I think everyone is in agreement that Cynos needed a change, but I think the way that CCP went about it just wasn't conducive to the type of game that we were used to and looking for, but also just not really conducive to anybody. So.
Well, I wanted to touch a little bit on what you mentioned about just everyday logistics, right? Because now that changes. So, say in the past, I just wanted to suitcase my mining ships or suitcase my whatever ships up a pipe, or I want to go a few systems away. I just load them in my carrier, light my Cyno, and I jump, and I have moved my logistics. Now it's a commitment. Now I got to move my recon that's inching up in price every day, right? So now we're talking about hundreds of millions of ISK. I have to now risk to light that Cyno and move my stuff like I wanted to. So now you gotta be careful. Do I arrange some defense? I mean, you got the benefit of the 5-minute Cyno, which is really nice, but you're still risking a significant asset just to move a few ships around, right?
Right. So and even beyond that too, just moving capitals, obviously if you want to suitcase something, it's a lot harder. But also as JFs, you get the Indie Cyno, which is great SP wise, but the issue with it is either if you want to move an Indie through low sec or null sec to try and set up your forward operating base chain, or if you want to, it's like either you risk a Falcon or you're just never gonna make it long term with your indie, and till you can actually seed those industrial cynos to wherever your midpoints are, which are also huge. I think they're 20k meters cubed package. Like that's a huge amount of inventory space if you legitimately want to have a good cyno chain setup where you're gonna have people setting up tornadoes or what have you to just blap random cynos that are out in space. So it's another huge just a huge cost, because you're costing your JF guys fuel as well, which again, it's not. I understand, I think, what they were looking for in terms of wanting a more of an ISK sync and stop the inflation, but overall, I think it's just making the game a bit less enjoyable for everybody, not even just the PvPers, but a lot of the indie guys too.
Well, I would say that it's not all bad, right? I was pretty negative when we talked about the industrial Cyno, and I still don't like it. But there are ways around it that you figured out. You know, you could fit enough parts in a ship to go build yourself a Nereus where you need to be. So there's that decent option. Um, and on the PvP side of things, at least from a defensive standpoint, you now know when a capital escalation is coming, right? If I see that recon, now you're heightenedly aware that caps are near, right? So like there's a flag now, like I'm coming with my caps, bro. Like be ready. Like it's a lot harder to surprise somebody with a cap drop, you know. So to me, I think that's good for my group, or you know, to at least be ready, or you know, not get so surprised all the time. I mean, what do you guys think about that?
The only benefit that I can see is I'm finally able to use that overview filter that I have that's like target recons. Like I've literally never used that for years. And now I can go, oh, okay, cool. So here's all the recons like on grid.
I did
That's the
tell
only
Billy.
positive I see.
Yeah.
I know,
I,
like,
Only
I
thing.
did tell Billy the other day that it felt disgusting flying Falcons around all the time.
Yeah.
and Falcons without jams, what heresy. Go ahead,
I
Mecha.
know.
It-
God.
There used to be a game you'd play in big fights where if you wanted to kill someone's Cyno and there's like 100 carriers on grid, you'd have to get someone in your FC team to switch all the graphics on and go around and look at each carrier and then like guess which carrier is like lighting the Cyno so you could kill it. Then, you know, see if they're prepared to light a new one. Whereas now it is literally really, really easy. Like I agree with the changes. I get what CCP are trying to do, but I think sooner or later CCP will realize that having 4 ships in the game that are going to be like
Whoa.
90% of Cynos.
9. Okay, never mind. You finished. Okay.
Well,
There's some AT ships I
sure.
saw, right?
There's
Oh, you're
you know,
right,
your AT
Silver.
ships and your
Right.
Marshall and your Blops, but how many people are gonna
Imperium, I'm looking at you.
gonna
I
wanna
want to
do
see
that?
some AT ship Cynos.
We do have a fit for the chameleon and an enforcer, so
I was gonna say, isn't a chameleon a co-op or a force recon?
I believe so.
Yeah, it is.
Deep
I'm-
pockets.
Come on, I want to see
Real deep
a
pocket.
force recon AT
But-
ship. Let's go.
We do
Yeah.
have some people that fly enforcers around, so you might see one of them.
I completely forgot about the enforcer too. You know, like I don't really like that whole line of ship, but yeah, that'll do it too.
I mean, its resists are super low just because it's a Concord ship, so they're all even, and its bonus to active tank doesn't really help you if you're trying to be a buffer Cyno, so.
No, it is literally purely a swag on people Cyno kind of thing.
That is
Yeah.
a really good insight you gave there, John, about the trying to figure out which ship was lighting the Cyno when you could light them on any ship and they were all huddled together. I never even like thought about that.
Yeah, no, it is a thing that you would do some. It's just super easy now. It's just you don't even broadcast rapiers or whatever. You just if you've got 100 munions, you just land on grid and just say shoot the recons, and they will just die if you've got like over 100 munions. Which it sounds like a lot to small alliances, but to anyone like Test, NC, Goons, Fraternity, they're going to get 100 munions on every one of their CTAs probably. So
Yeah, and
no,
if you already
no
have
sign of surviving.
Yeah, and if you have dreads on grid already too, like I said earlier, you blap them with dreads and they apply basically perfectly, as we saw in FTZ.
Well, here's the good news, right? So, not unlike Blackout, which was kind of like all or nothing, right? CCP does have now a lot of room to adjust, right? They can add ships, they can tweak the stats, they can do a lot of things now. And you know, we've heard from Rise and others in CCP that would be the plan, right? I highly doubt that this will stay as it is right now. and they can tweak it back. I'm just hoping they actually do that. I'm a little bit worried about blackout. Maybe we can talk about that later, but this is one thing that they definitely can add, take away, and change much more dynamically, right?
Yeah, I think the big thing is really, I think they need to communicate a little more on what they're looking to get out of this, besides just, oh, we're causing chaos. This is the chaos guy. Like there wasn't a whole lot of rhyme or reason to it. Besides the fact that everyone was, saying Cyno's overpowered, which, to be fair, Cynos and capitals are pretty dumb because, like John was saying earlier, you get one capital in, you light your Cyno, and there's going to be a Titan fleet on top of you, or there's going to be 300 more dreads. There's just no counterplay to that. I
Well, you
think
could
that,
argue Cyno inties are pretty OP too, right?
yeah, oh yeah, absolutely, and that's why I think that was the main reason they like went with this sort of change. I do think they went a little too much about to the other side of the spectrum, but like my personal thought on it was, okay, if you don't want it on inties or just decies, anything like super small and super fast that you can move around and get instantly, is you can limit it to cruisers, BCs, and battleships if you
Picks.
want, or something like that. Yeah, Hicks. Just adding, I think, a little more flexibility would be really nice, and it would still allow for escalation of capital content, and allow that gameplay. I think a big thing that they're looking at is their player base retention, and if you look at a lot of the spikes in Eve's player base, it's when they get publicity from these big cap fights. The $1 million fight, Asakai, BTEC R, 9TAC 4, all these fights had just massive gaming articles written about them, and I really wouldn't be remiss to say you probably would be able to really notice the spike in new player base there, and a lot of it is just based on those articles. And if you're hammering capital content this hard, like why are you not taking the free publicity, basically? Um,
Um,
I don't think you necessarily need to have like giant cap fights every time, but I think the more that you hinder it, the less of this you're actually going to
Bad
get.
for content in the game in general, I think, beyond the point.
Yeah,
Like, so do I think the game could function with just recon Cynos? I think it could, but I think you'd be limiting the amount of capital escalations that happen. You'd definitely be limiting some of the big fights that make the game so popular.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
looking
I
at
think I agree, and I think CCP would see it over time, right? I think they're watching. I'm confident that they have the tools in this case, this particular gas change, to make fairly rapid and calculated changes, right?
looking at
think
what CCP. Go ahead, Dom.
I was just gonna say, honestly, click off that. Sorry. With the Cyno Changes being stuck on recon, I will say roaming around, because that's what I like to do, is just take like some destroyers or frigates out. I know what's going to Cyno on me. I'm not
Yeah, you
worried
see
about
it coming, right?
right. This dreadnought right here is not going to Cyno on me.
Right.
Obviously, a recon.
Or the battleship
Oh,
you tackled, or anything like that, right?
right. So
The carrier you got tackled.
exactly. Like, I feel like that can encourage some of the smaller groups to be a little more bold. So that I agree they should probably open up the amount of holes. But I like the idea they're going for. It just they need to spread it out. They need to spread it out a little more for more variety. Because right now it's too easy to know if they have a Cyno or not.
I know at G Fleet, I think it was, maybe it was the Helmar sitting down with Berger at FanFest Home. They had a discussion where it was mentioned pretty explicitly CCP does not like the current state of super capital umbrellas, like even with the Cyno changes, even with the local blackout, which has since been reversed, they don't like the idea of a super capital umbrella working in its current form. So I would not be surprised if CCP's intentions with these Cyno changes are to take the level down a notch with how powerful they are in terms of hot dropping, but specifically targeting super capital umbrellas through this change. That's where my money is as far as what CCP goals are with this change.
I think there are way better and different ways to do that besides just Cyno changes. I think, again, everyone agrees that capital and supercap proliferation is absolutely insane right now. and how you can have single tunes that have a Titan, a super, a second Titan, a second super, a third Titan, a third super. And I think more of that is more of like Supercap docking and keep stars, and I think that's more of an overlying issue than just like cynos in general, personally.
So really quickly, before we transition into discussing sort of the cap-on-cap escalation more in depth than we have previously, I want to mention a thing from a bit of a different perspective. Well, two things actually. So first, if you haven't heard it on the Less Than 10 podcast, they had Frederick von Hull, who is a prolific sort of hunter of other hunters in game. And he does this by dropping carriers onto Blob's battleships, or famously Alliance tournament ships. And he basically flat out said, yeah, me and all the people who do my gameplay, we can't do it anymore. Because you can't inject up covert or force recon alts in order to go around and do this. It doesn't work. People won't take the fights, things like that. And then on another side of that, I recently joined NOIR, and we're all sort of going into our new staging system. And I realized, like, as a small group or as an individual pilot, moving a capital around, you just can't do it anymore. Like, the routes that people take to move capitals are camped, and they're well known. And people are waiting with a bunch of NATOs or Taluses or whatever to go and kill your recon cyno. You're not going to move your capital that way. In fact, you'd be better off just buying a new capital where you're going and insurance frauding your own old one, and that'll cost you less than all of the lost recon cynos. So that is a thing that it's interesting. Maybe that's intended by CCP. Maybe they don't want small groups to have these large capital assets. We'll have to find out. But let's talk about this video that I've got playing right now and all of the other battle reports I've got just waiting in the wings of fights where subcap fights have happened, usually over structures, and then they've escalated into capital v capital fights. We talked about it a little bit. I know that was the main concern when these changes were coming in, that these force recons would just get blown off the field and whoever had caps on field first won. Is that what we're seeing? Or can you actually come in with capital second and still stand a chance?
In the fight I was part of, which is the one in Rhea on the 15th September, I think that us dropping hard and heavy initially definitely won us. We traded, I think it was 18 dreads of our own for 33, and the numbers were pretty even. I think us getting on grid and getting momentum early definitely swung in their favor.
Well, why is that? That we were able to interdict their ability to reinforce? Like, did you grab grid control and not allow any more cynos to be lit? Did any of that play?
So, strangely, in that fight, I think every cyno lived except for the very last one that Goons lit, which is the very end of the fight. I think it's just momentum based. Like, as you, in dread fights especially, when you are trading back and forth, getting that momentum and having people getting that really good cadence and pace and shooting target then secondary, the new primary is really important. And getting on grid sooner means you can cap up your dread sooner, which means you can use your capital energizers, which is a big impact in dread fights.
Right, but isn't that standard strategy though, even post Cyno change?
Well, so we dropped harder than we would have previously because we were concerned that if we didn't get our full first wave in, they would overwhelm us because we thought they might have more than we did, because Goons have more people than we do in the Alliance. But it turned out the numbers were fairly even, and by getting in early, we were able to swing momentum just by taking their dreads up before the guards out.
Yeah, there's also, in terms of capital escalations, there's a few different disciplines of thinking, and it really depends on what you're doing. I think when you drop hard and heavy, as long as you're not getting baited, even if you have a relatively even number of dreads, but if I drop 5 dreads first, you drop 5 dreads, and all of a sudden I drop 35, when that pops up on your overview, it obviously pops up a whole lot quicker. And I think a lot of times people will tend to overestimate how much is on field in comparison to what actually is there, versus trying to bait out more dreads or what have you. So I think in that case as well with Johnny's drop, also when you drop harder at first, you're obviously burning through a lot of dreads initially a lot faster, so you're breaking them of their critical mass. So it's usually better, again, if you're not getting baited, to have the initiative when you're dropping, because you have more DPS on field immediately and you can start whittling away at their DPS a lot faster.
Sure, and I agree. I'm trying to get at the Cyno changes. Has that and changed the way you think? Has it changed the way you can escalate? Have there been noticeable impacts to what you've known for the past decade?
It's less of a poker game now and more of a brute force fight. It feels like to me, because
That's
like
what I'm getting at. So,
previously,
like, are you
yeah.
more prone now to just drop the house because I got to get him in?
So I think what we did is we brought in all the revelations first, and then the second someone called on comms, the goons were mass jumping, we called for everything else to jump. We just kind of split it half and half and brought the first half in, and then we brought everything in shortly thereafter. I think that goons were gambling that they would surprise us with their numbers and have 10 or 20 more than us. Didn't work out in their favor that time.
So that was the Rhea fight. We've talked about FDZ already. I've also got a battle report from Horde on an MTAC M over in Geminate. What's the story with this one?
So the West Geminate portion of the map has been a little bit contested recently. There's 3 goon SIGs, and they've actually taken one of our former systems of MTAC MD. And one of the guys who runs the SIG had, I think it was 5 ratting Dominixes out. So we pinged our corporation to go drop them with carriers, just totally intentionally to provoke an escalation. And it just kind of went crazy from there.
Oh wow, nice.
The reality is that in EVE 2019, like, content is pretty stagnant. So anything you can do to get content, sometimes even if it's over a nothing timer, like a terror armor timer, an NPC null, or a ratting fleet drop, can provoke a big response. And I think dynamic content is a lot more fun these days in the big set piece fight.
I can feel the Ron coming in hot and heavy but there's a war going down south.
Actually, I have a quick question. It's kind of a side note, but I saw a couple of the battle reports, and I was wondering, like, why are you guys concerned with Geminate, right? Like, I thought you moved, and like we're just gonna leave Geminate to, whatever the sagebrush or whatever to.
We're not.
But I was wondering, like, why are you guys hitting so hard over there? Are you guys still maintaining structures and things over there, or what's going on with that?
Really care that much about Gem, at least not the west portion of Geminate at this point. It's more just to provoke content. I think Horde's a little bit bored, and I frankly think Goons are a little bit bored as well. And I think that both sides are keen to have some capital brawls over timers that frankly don't matter very much in the grand scheme of things, just for fun.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense, actually. Yeah.
I'm gonna back up a little bit too to Silver's point. I actually played the FDZ fight like I naturally, or like I was, brought up, basically, quote unquote, brought up to do, and have that pretty step by step escalation. The entire fight started with give a little context here, a Retaru timer in NPC Gemini in NPZ, FDZ, sorry, and goons initially dropped their facts, and we dropped 5 Jeds on their facts to kill their facts, and then everything kind of escalated from there. But like I said, like, once we were on grid, just recon would die, we would go to counter escalate, bring a little bit more in, then that recon would die, they'd bring theirs, their recon would die. So when you did have that step ladder, it was brutal, and by the end of it, we were very close to not panicking, but being a little bit uncomfortable with the fact that, basically our last recon cyno, all of our alts are burning more recon alts over to get more dreads in, as the fight keeps kicking off. So I think it does lend itself to show more of wanting that drop the hammer kind of vibe, just to kind of like reinforce, I guess, what Johnny was saying earlier about Rhea. It's just I do think you're right in that it will end up with more of that being just drop everything, because if we don't, you might be caught in a really, really terrible place and not have a recon nearby in order to save you again.
So those are some fights that took place where the stakes are really just content, so to speak. Yeah, there's risk on the line, but these aren't strategic assets, so to speak. Let's shift our focus a bit down to the war that's happening in the south. We've seen so far capital escalation and fights happening over tackled Rorquals and Crabbers. John, Ron, Silver, have there been capital escalation fights happening outside of tackling crabs, like over other strategic assets, or are those fights not happening specifically because of Cyno changes?
John would know.
Uh,
John, if ever supers or caps are dropped, John is somewhere right involved. But I mean, the first thing that I think about is, just for iHubs, right? So faxes and possibly dreads to kill the faxes, and then more faxes, that kind of thing to secure the toasters. But you know, lots of kind of smaller warfare. But John, what is your impression of kind of capital warfare going up or down or staying the
well,
same? Because I know we haven't had a real big fight, but
I think it's hard to say. I think if you wanted to judge the changes on their own, you'd need to pit two equally capable sides against each other, where the war between Test and Fraternity is a time zone tank war. So at like 1800 to 2200 Eve, you're in the height of EU to prime zone, and Test has a huge advantage. Like Fraternity doesn't form an EU time zone at all anymore, pretty much, because we have such a just numbers advantage in EU time zone that we can throw whatever we want and they will not call it. And to get these big capital balls, you need someone to either make a big mistake or to someone to call you. When you put 20 carriers on grid, someone needs to call you with dreads, right? And Fraternity will not do that in EU time zone. So we haven't really seen many big capital fights. The last one that was potentially going to turn into a capital fight was what we talked about earlier, the H93 fight, where basically Fraternity didn't red light when it got to EU time zone and they had Voracles still out. One of our FCs found the Voracles and tackled them and dropped some dreads. And now while our dreads dropped, we formed a Munin fleet and more dreads. And because we had, a good amount of dreads, Fraternity didn't call to counter drop our dreads. So the Voracles died while we balled with Munins. And that's pretty typical for the wall down south. Even in China time zone, Fraternity's starting to fail. They're not really willing to use their capitals on us anymore, especially now that AOM has entered the front. But yeah, there's not many. I mean, 03 today shows it that Fraternity isn't really willing to fight our capitals.
Right, and on the smaller side of things, the week that the Cyno Changes went in was last week, right? FedUp was being attacked quite often by adversity from Snuff, and we use capitals just about every time to shove them off the iHub. So I think Artimus, you made the point a couple weeks ago that hey, maybe carriers are a great way to put an end to a subcap fight or equalize a subcap fight, right? So we had very good luck practicing with lighting a Falcon, dropping a fax to keep it alive, and then dropping Hodreds onto a hub that was being entosist. And we did that probably every night for 5 or 6 nights in a row, because we could see if they didn't have an Erazo or any type of recon, that they weren't going to counter. I mean, Villy in our pocket probably helped a little bit, but I think that's a change, and I think we made it work.
And on the smaller to mid-scale side of things, the worry of your cynos being blapped isn't as great, depending on what range you're at. Because if you're out of dread range, like you're dropping sniper dreads and they have regular cap gun dreads, you can fax rep your cyno against any subcap damage if you're at a small enough scale. So it definitely seems to be there's a dichotomy between these large Munin fleet v Munin fleet where no matter what happens, your cyno is going to die, versus smaller scale things where the cyno has a chance of living. It seems like that dynamic shifts dramatically.
It does. I would agree. I mean, a 200k EHP Falcon is with a fax rep can hold up to quite a bit of a normal small gang or a medium sized subcap fight.
Right on. Definitely some food for thought for the future. It'll be interesting to see. CCP has definitely mentioned they're open to changes. I know a lot of people have talked about looking at adding cynos to covert T3Cs just to get more EHP there behind your cyno. Just on the board, guys, what do you think? If you could say, hey CCP, add the cyno back to this ship, what would that ship be for you?
Not T3s. That's
not
ridiculous.
T3s for Ron. Okay,
Jesus,
Adra, how about you?
Hectors, bring back the Hectors.
Also, either Hick as well or command ships. One of the two would be good.
How about you, Don?
Well, I'm always partial to my Brutics, so battle cruisers.
What battle cruisers? Is it just because you like the hulls, or there's a strategic reason?
I can't do it now, so it doesn't matter. But one thing that we would do when like certain size gangs come into Delve, I would take my whole tank British Navy and just fly into them with 3 points, and they would take the bait every time, and I'd let my Cyno and Hull and black. So I'm a little partial to that because the people are stupid.
Curious. I quite like the idea of adding them to battlecruisers or battleships because it allows for a cheaper option for people who want to move capitals from place to place if you're a small to solo player and you need to move your capital across the map. Force Recon just too expensive, it's not worth it. But a T1 haul that you can insure, now that's an option. How about, let's see, who haven't we heard from? John, what about you?
I would actually go with the battle cruiser as well, just because it allows newer players to get involved with the stuff that most big alliances do every day, and even small alliances do every day. And like, Cyno's pretty important for a lot of things, and even nullsec and lowsec. And I think recons are like, it's quite a lot of SP, and like it's a few months in game before you'd expect someone to be sat in a recon. So I think opening it up to something that's like a month of training is probably a good idea.
Awesome. And I think, Silver, you're the last one we haven't heard from. What's your opinion?
I also like the battlecruiser. I think it's a good cheap option. It's not as easy to move around as like a small ship, so you're gonna have to be careful moving it. But you get some options there. You could put a micro jump on it or a jump drive on it and boost away from bubbles if you wanted to. And there's some gameplay there that I think would help with that logistical thing that you're mentioning, Artemis. Because I agree, it's kind of hard to move capitals around.
Right on. So CCP, if you're listening, I know Wrecking Crew and my Horde bros here are definitely looking for that Hick Cyno, and think about the battle cruisers. They need some love. But overall, temperature on the Cyno changes. Is it game breaking? Can we adapt to it? What's your feel? How happy are we with Eve moving forward with the Cyno changes as they are now?
I think Eve players are very resourceful, and I think they will always find ways to play their game. That's one of the reasons why we all play Eve, because of that kind of creativity. I still currently don't think that the changes that they've immediately made are actually healthy for the game. As much, like I said, I think we can play the game. I just don't think it's going to be super healthy long term to play the game in this way.
And it will need some iteration. It'll need some iteration, but it's not game breaking.
That's one thing I don't like about CCP. I find they're really slow, like glacial slow to iterate in their changes. They should be more fast acting, I think.
I know they have even used that comment about themselves. I believe it was Hilmar mentioned in his Chaos interview we have turned it, or maybe it was Blackout interview, I forget, on TIS. He's like, in the past, we've tried to think, get inside the heads of Eve players, and stay one step ahead of them in how they'd react to our game changes. Whereas now they're looking to make changes more quickly and just sort of do it trial by error or more experimentation, controlled changes when they don't necessarily know the exact outcome. So I'm hopeful, at least, that that particular complaint won't be as true in the future. And indeed, we've seen with Blackout, it's gone now. We don't know why, because CCP hasn't said exactly, but they are iterating.
I'm a little bit worried about Blackout. I don't know if we want to get into it, but
let's save that for another time. And quickly, before we hop into news, is there anything about the Cyno changes, anything related to combat, catfighting that we haven't discussed, that we missed?
Yeah, one thing, the industrial Cyno animation looks really cool.
All right. I was using them quite a bit, but I always had my graphics set to low, so I didn't notice.
Dude, turn them on. They look really cool. It looks good.
Fair enough. All right, well, let's hop into some newsy type stuff. There's a lot of stuff happening down in the Southern War. So much stuff that if I were to make a prediction, I'd say that it's going to be the subject of many shows going forward. Ron, can you give us a quick, or John, Ron, Silver, any of you guys, TLDR, what's happening down south? What's the news?
I always give the update, so let's do John. What's happened kind of like overall in the past week? Just kind of like the high points.
So Fraternity spun up their "everything is not our fault" okay, we'll start with I'm a test strat FC, so I look at it from test perspective. To get that clear, if anyone says I'm biased, I am biased. But Fraternity spun up there, everything is not our fault. We're still winning, but it's AOM's fault that we're losing, which is a very contradictory message. To retaliate, they said, we're going to drop 2 46 TP forts and we're going to get them online. And they said something along the lines of, if AOM get involved, we're going to not be very happy and we're going to attack Omist. AOM, being good allies, defended XIX's border and both 46 TP forts died. And then Fraternity have declared war. Well, AOM declared war on Fraternity back because of the slander, as they see it. And so now AOM are actively participating in offensive actions against Fraternity, which in the previous parts of the war, they stayed out of it because they just wanted to start out on TQ in a good way. Fraternity lost both forts and fed a bit on both forts. They said recently, today actually, that they're gonna leave Detroit. They don't like it anymore, but they're happy to take Omist in exchange, which I don't quite get how that works. So that's pretty much the TLDR.
Fair enough. For anyone unfamiliar, AOM refers to the Army of Mangoes Alliance, and there's a really fantastic history to dig into with that group and the group in Fraternity, but to summarize it way too short than I really should, AOM are mostly players from the winners, quote-unquote, of the Serenity server, PIBC, and Fraternity are also some of those folks, but more generally speaking, just an assortment of players who moved over from Serenity before Serenity shut down. However, they have gained quite a few players since Serenity did shut down. So there's definitely a lot of backstory, a lot of history between those two groups. When AOM first came over, that is the Army of Mangoes, as John said, they were at peace. That has now changed, and AOM has entered the fray. It's going to be interesting to watch down in the south of Eve, looking at Dreddit, looking at Innsmother, looking at Wicked Creek, Scalding Pass, etc. It'll be interesting to see what happens in that area. It'll also be interesting looking up north. It seems like we've got Pandemic Horde and the Imperium getting a little restless, looking for some content. So I'm interested to see how the sparks fly up there. There's content happening around Eve despite Blackout. Speaking of which, Blackout ended. We've got a lot of people with a lot of opinions. Quick hot take or cold take, whatever your opinion is. Blackout's gone. Happy or sad? Adra?
I'm sad. I thought Blackout was great. It did make Black Ops a lot more powerful because suddenly you had to watch every regional or whatever before things just appeared. But I think, especially now with the Cyno changes, it makes any sort of escalation or even hunting in general for small gang extremely difficult. I know you were mentioning earlier that Von Hull basically said like hunting is ridiculously hard now. It's obviously even harder at this point because unless you have a very clean recon ult, somebody enters your system, you do a quick Z kill, and you see that they have a Falcon loss. You're like, all right, I'm peacing out. I think it makes it way too difficult, and I think it makes the game way too safe, at least for nullsec. Yeah.
Dawn?
I didn't mind the blackout when it came to my roaming around stuff, but I'm glad it's gone because I'm happy to use my excavators again and actually see people around me hanging out, doing stuff together. We're spending a lot of time together mining now because of the recon requirements.
Awesome. Johnny?
I think Blackout was great if you're someone who likes to create offensive content, but I think it was totally overpowered as far as Black Ops go, and I think that it made home defense and defensive content difficult to impossible, especially if you're in a smaller group.
Actually, defense was the easiest thing in the world. We set so many traps because they couldn't see us coming either. It made home defense so much easier to take care of.
I mean, I would disagree based on the Imperium Titans that died in Delve during the Blackout. Each their own.
All right, we'll nip that conversation in the bud before we go too far down that rabbit hole. John, final hot take of the day. What are your thoughts on Blackout?
I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the experiment, but I do think it needed to. Statistics don't lie, and it was hurting CCP's revenue and player count, which is important at the end of the day. Whether you are in high sec or null sec, you need people playing the game. So,
all right, fair enough. And myself, Ron, and Silver, we've given our opinions in other places multiple times over. So we'll refer you to our other outsources of content and talk about some other changes CCP are making. On Singularity server right now, there's an upcoming change for October, and it is quality of life changes focusing on new players. This is CCP. When Hilmar discussed his plan for the future, he had two arms to it. One was making things harder for older players, and the other was making things easier for newer ones. And these changes are focused on that. So we've got some general stuff. One big thing to note is to prevent item exchange scams relying on changing the trade's manifest at the last second. Trading now has a confirmation window. So rest in peace, trade window scamming. Ron rejoice. Scammers, do your thing. That's
Down
a
with
massive
scammers,
change.
man. It's so stupid. Yeah, get rid of it. Yeah, awesome. I love this kind of stuff. You know, people that just start the game, like 3 or 4 days in, they just they aren't prey. You know what I mean? Like it's so stupid. So I'm glad. Yeah, do it. Love it.
Right on. Some other changes we've seen, and again, this is on Singularity, so things are subject to change before they hit TQ. But we have a Dreadnought as an invading precursor entity. So, there's been a lot of speculation about new construction platforms in Abyssal Space, about what they look like, about maybe it's a Dreadnought. We've had a lot of people asking for a Triglavian Dreadnought. Now there is a Dreadnought entity called an invading precursor entity, precursors being the Triglavians for the time being. People are super excited about that. Also, a bunch of new stuff relating to invasions and the fancy implants that increase the maximum damage spool on Triglavian weapons, the disintegrators, now have a mid-grade set on Singularity, so it's no longer just the low-grade set. And the low-grade set is on TQ right now, if I understand correctly. You can get it through the DED store.
Something just to comment on the last change, the trade windows. Just for all you FCs out there, there will be a dialog box that auto accepts, so that you don't, want to off yourself while you're smashing accept twice. There will be a select that stops that auto accepts for you.
Good shout out there. You will have to hit a confirmation thing, and if you go on CC now and it's broken for you, don't worry, it's CC, they know about the problem. So all right.
There's another change on Sissy that's kind of a big deal. I don't know if you saw it or not, but the Moloch blueprint cache is going from 20,000 M3s to 400,000 M3s. And this is one of the things, I've been kind of rallying about for the past month and a half. And, at 20,000 M3s, what that allows for is for people that, whatever, their hands are faster than light, basically, right? So they're able to loot things from the NPC Satoyo faster, than a human. So then they steal that and then they jump out, and then, so with 400,000 and 3, you're going to need a freighter, baby. So adios, muchachos.
Can you use a jump freighter? Or does
No.
it have to be a regular freighter?
Has to be a regular freighter. Jump freighters only go up to 384k-ish with blinged expanders and everything.
Okay, so maybe the strat of stealing it goes away, but I am super excited to see battle reports of people suiciding dreads to kill freighters with Titan BPCs in them. I can't wait.
Now that's cool. I like that kind of thing, right? Not the faster than light kind of thing. And I know John has some experience with this because, if I remember right, you told me you had the loot can open and you were getting ready to grab it and it just disappeared, and then that was that.
So you're
The
referring
science.
to referring to one particular member of a certain
No,
Thera-based
no,
corporation?
no. Obviously, no. No, I mean, this is going to be someone random, of course.
Just hypothetical, I see.
I've talked to a lot
Absolutely
of
random.
people
Mhm.
in test, that have tried them, and we don't know how the person in question does it. And so typically when you have a think tank of many people trying to figure something out, you presume that someone is using something that you shouldn't be to get the thing done. Now, we'll never know if that's true or not. There's always a chance that he did find something that, we didn't. But yeah, it'll be really hard to steal now. There'll be no, just the biggest change to having to use a freighter is that there'll be no cloaking 2,000 meters away from it anymore. You'll see them coming, very slowly coming. So yeah, I don't think many people will try and steal them anymore. So, you'll be using a billion disc a pop now.
As you guys said, the tactic at this point would just be, if I can't have it, you can't either, and it'll be trying to suicide a couple dreads to smash the freighter, for sure.
I think you could steal it still potentially. I think it would be much more difficult to execute, but I think there is a way to steal. I don't want to say what it is on stream.
You
totally
bridge
honest.
out your freighter.
You could definitely still steal. It's just a lot more effort, even just to get the freighter into like some random part of nullsec.
All right. Just as one final note on this conversation topic, the security team would like me to let you know if you suspect any EVE Online player, corporation, alliance, or other group of doing something they shouldn't in game, there's a report button. Use it at your discretion. All right, and with that, we're going to hop into a little section we like to call Something You Might Not Know. This is where the hosts and the guests tell the audience something they may not know related to EVE. I'll kick things off, then we'll go to our guests and finish it off with my co-host. So as promised, I'm going to give you something you might not know about the usefulness of remote tracking computers. I found this out. It wasn't my idea. It was shared with me by a courtmate of mine as a result of a courtmate of his. So there is a player who I'm going to shout out here because it looks like he isn't doing this as often anymore, so I don't think I'm leaking any secret strats, and also killboards are a thing. But his name was Boss Sausage, and he had the brain to realize that people use Bifrost alts to give links to and an MJD to their alts when they're going around soloing, small ganging, things like that. And so we thought, if I use some of the mids on my Bifrost and stick some remote tracking computers on there, I can make a Kikimora be like a death laser at 60 kilometers. And so he did that and was very successful with a Kikimora. And this is not just useful for Kikimoras, but many other ships as well. And if you're so inclined, you can do it with, say, a Zealot and an Oniros, which has a bonus to remote tracking computers. So if you're of the ilk to like to solo/small gang PvP, and you happen to have an alt with some links on it, and a Bifrost or an Oniros, throw some RTCs in the mids, and it'll be useful to you. Make sure to use the regroup command, though, to make sure they stay all anchored on your main manual piloting ship. That is my Something You Might Not Know. Definitely go check out Boss Sausage's killboards. There are some entertaining battle reports. Let's hop down to Adra. You're first on the list. What is your tip for our audience?
Yeah, you can avoid by jumping to the wrong Cyno, either a bait Cyno or bait beacon, by adding your Cyno tune to your watch list, or whoever your corporation or alliance's tune is to your watch list, and jumping via the watch list.
Wait, how does that work? Do you right-click their name in the watch list and jump to?
Yeah, you can right-click their name in the watch list, and there's literally a button that says jump to member, and you can just jump.
That's what I've always done.
Wow. Right on. Dawn, you're up next. What's your tip?
Something that I profess in Theta, so I always seem to get somebody who's never heard this. You can store a mining barge that's being attacked into a Rorqual, no matter what, as long as it's not aggressing somebody. So even if they're panicked, scrammed, webbed, pointed, tracking disrupted, neuted to heck, 10% structure, you can right-click store, and your ship is safe and warp your pod away.
You know, I never thought of that.
I've done it a million times to people trying to kill my Mercoxic coveter, and so I never dock him up anymore. I just leave him next to my Rorqual at 1,000 meters, and I just right-click store. Now you have to be empty, so you can't have any ore in you. That's the only thing that could. But it's pretty much the best way to lure people in.
Damn, I like it.
Pro tip if you're a high-sec miner and not AFK, you can do this with orcas too and avoid getting ganked. Alright, let's move on down the list to Johnny Trousersnake. What do you have for us?
My tip is that shipping your deployment assets via a freighter, such as a Chiron, through a point-6 system is a dangerous proposition, and you should definitely switch your load where you can. The best solution to avoiding the high-sec anchors is to minimize your cargo value.
I've heard quite a few numbers thrown about as a general rule of thumb for the maximum ISK you should put in any given freighter load. Do you have a rule of thumb?
I don't actually do much high-sec shipping, but I've always heard that 1 billion ISK is the most you should ever stuff in a freighter.
Right on. Alright, John, how about you?
I don't know if this is in the patch notes, but it's a very recent change. Previously, the current fighters from carriers and super carriers, or Komodo if you're, or Cayman if you're very rich, wouldn't warp back to you when they were on grid with you. So if they could see you, they wouldn't warp, they would slow boat. But CCP changed it so that they work like the alt fighters did, I believe now. Whereas if they're further than, I think, 200 kilometers by my testing, and
300 and you stole line,
they will warp back to you now, which is an amazing change in my opinion.
It is, and for a ship that hasn't gotten much love in a while, right?
I mean, to be fair, the fighter application was freaking broken, okay? They deserve some.
I'm not saying, I'm just saying, like, the carrier hasn't gotten any love in a while. And this
Silence
is a nice
him.
love, right?
Silence me?
Right? I mean, it's not making it more powerful. It's just making the cab pilot, the carrier pilot's life a little bit easier than having to watch some damn fighters slow boat. They have warp drives.
I think it's a little bit more of a change than that. I mean, it basically makes Skynetting basically a thing again.
Also a buff to long-range fighters, which are really slow naturally.
And the old, what is it called? Trebuchet, whatever, where you have fighters and all your carriers tethered to an Astra, a Keepstar grid, and send the fighters across.
Yeah, Skynetting.
It does remove some play that you used to be able to do. You used to be able to punish people from taking a fight they couldn't win and kill all their fighters, which you won't be doing anymore. Fighters are pretty expensive, so maybe they should have a bit more of a defense mechanism.
All right, let's hop into Silver. What's something our audience might not know?
Well, my friend stole mine, but I guess we were talking about how to not jump to a fake Cyno or something in a Titan or a capital ship. Another way, if you're a Titan pilot, to not accidentally jump when you're supposed to bridge is to run your prop mod when you're sitting there and keep yourself below jump cap. So when you go to bridge, that doesn't use cap, you can bridge. But if you accidentally hit jump, you won't be at jump cap and won't jump.
Right on. And last but not least, RonUSMC. What's something our audience might not know?
So I did this on stream, and I think we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but I'm not sure. But so with the Cyno Changes, one of the interesting ships that can light the industrial Cyno is the Prowler, right? The blockade runner, which is cloaky, can be fit up really nice, but it can also be stored inside of a Rorqual. So what you could do is take your pod over to the Rorqual, jump in the blockade runner, get out of the ship hangar, and then light the industrial Cyno, and then light the panic on the Rorqual, and the panic will cover the industrial Cyno. So you'll have like a little safe Cyno for about 5 minutes or something.
Yeah, I love that.
And overly complicated. Again, it's like, we're going to make the car just a little bit more difficult. You just have to hit these 2 buttons and then you can start it. Like, it's just, I don't know. But yeah.
Well, the importance of that is you have a hard Cyno you can Titan bridge your recons to, right?
All right. Well, that'll do it for this episode of Talking in Stations during the middle of the week on Wednesday. Thanks again to our fantastic cast of guests. We had 2 representatives from Pandemic Horde in Johnny and, gosh darn it, I'm looking at the wrong page. What's your nickname here? Adra, there we go. I didn't want to say the wrong word. We also have Don, a member of Goonswarm Federation, and John Hun, a member of Chess Alliance Please Ignore. Thanks again very much for joining us and sharing your insights on the Cyno changes and how they relate to capital fighting in EVE Online. We'll be back again in the future at the normal time, Sundays 1600 UTC and Wednesdays 2359 UTC. See you then.